All right. This is, so I want to introduce my really good friend, Cecilia Patty from the Boise State Writing Project. And we thought it would be really cool to introduce the C3WP National Writing Project site through the lens of an English language learner teacher, an ELS specialist. So our project here, we have English teachers and a social studies teacher paired with their ELS specialist who they work with in their school. So I'm going to let Cecilia take it away. And I'm so excited to do this with you. Thank you.
Well, thanks for inviting me and asking me about this work that we've been doing, in particular with working with language learners, because anytime Molly and I talk, we always talk about, okay, but what our students and this demographic. So the larger conversation that we can have about that is always super exciting. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about that. I think the best thing to do and to ask, well, let me ask you to do this. If you have two different screens, I would pull up the C3WP website. If not, if you just have one screen, like on mine, I just narrowed my Zoom meeting screen, and then I have on the side the C3WP screen, and I've narrowed that down. Does that make sense?
And I sent all of you the link last night to the C3WP site, so you should have an email from me from last night with that link. So if you don't have it, raise your hand and I can come around and help you get situated.
So when you do get there, let's see here. I'll walk you through where to go.
You're so good at work. Is anyone having trouble getting to the site?
Everyone's there?
Cool.
All right, okay. So then if you click on instructional resources, it's up at the top, and then there's a drop down arrow that'll take you to secondary. So click on the secondary and then scroll down, and then you'll see this graph. And it's titled the Secondary Instructional Resource Guide. Do you see that? And if you will click on Writing and Revising Claims, and then it gives you this whole overview and instructional resource. And if you'll scroll down to the second page, you'll notice a first call out box on the right in blue, and it says ELL notice. Is everyone there? Awesome. No yawning. No yawning. Okay, so I want to first give you a little bit of background on these call-out boxes. Are you guys familiar with them? Molly, did you walk them through any of these?
We just very briefly talked about them last night.
Okay.
We did some text walks through some books, and then this was one of the options. So I just sort of showed it to them and explained it to them. So we're not uber familiar with C3WP site. So this is sort of a first big sort of deep dive into it. So.
Okay. So let me give you then a little bit of background on how these little boxes, call out boxes, came about. So in 2016, I was invited to create some resources for these mini units that were already created. So this resource was already out, there was a website out, But the leadership team and anyone facilitating continuously received questions about, well, what about our ELL students? And that might be a familiar question that you hear or that you may have even asked. Okay, I have this curriculum, I have this book, I have these resources, but what does this mean for my ELL students? What do I do for them? And I was, like I said, I was asked to do something about that. Like, what can we do? And from the beginning, I was wobbling. I think you guys are all familiar with pose, wobble, flow. And so I was wobbling, but I didn't know why. I didn't know what my stance was. And so I said, okay, let's try to think about this. And there was another teacher that was very familiar with technology, and her job was to point out where opportunities to embed technology in the resources and the lessons and activities throughout the resources. So that's where our ideas merge. I thought, well, I can see where this is good stuff for our ELL students, or as an ESL teacher, I can see what I would do within these resources. I think they are very well made. And but we continue to get questions. And so that's when I was asked to, like, well, call those out, point them out. And to me, again, I was wobbling, and to be honest, a little bit annoyed, like, why do I have to point these things out? I don't understand, So again, but that was my wobble, and I didn't know why. And so as I started doing that, sorry, my coffee was just delivered. Thank you, honey. I got an email from an ESL teacher, and that's just when it hit me as I was replying to her email, that I had no problem talking to a mainstream teacher, a social studies teacher, an ELA teacher about how to use the C3WP resources and how to add scaffolding for their English language learners. But it was when an ESL teacher asked me that it hit me what my wobble was, and not necessarily what my wobble was, but what my stance was. And my stance was that, wait a minute, this is evident to me because I am the ultimate resource for our English language learners. At some point, someone acknowledged that English language learners need some different instruction, or have a different way of need different scaffolding, and valued that. And so they made this profession, and they made classes, and for someone to specifically study that. And I did that. And so I am a professional that studied language acquisition, critical pedagogy. And so when I see these curriculums, that's the lens that I see things through. And so they're evident for me because that's my experience. I'm also a language learner. English is my second language. So I also have that background and that experience. And then on top of that, my administrators and my co-teachers that I've always worked with have always named me that, and given me that authority to make those professional decisions, have come to me and asked me, hey, this curriculum, what do I do here for ELL students? And so it had that practice in saying that. And then I realized that needed to be said. That needed to be said to a lot more ELL, ESL teachers, anyone working with language learners, that the scaffolding, the strategies. This is why we studied, that we are professionals, and how can we work together with other teachers to show our expertise and begin to actually name those and call those out, if that makes sense.
Well, and I think what's so powerful about that, Cecilia, is that I think a lot of times administrators don't know what they don't know until we as the experts point that out for them and sort of empower them to either do further study or to dig into it more, or even empower them to ask us what should be done. And I think, you know, that wobble that you have around these call outs is really, really interesting, because the implications behind that wobble are that, you know, we are the experts, both literacy and language acquisition and critical pedagogy and all of the things that come into that. And then how do we best sort of manage up with our administrators in order to help them understand the level of our expertise and to empower them to say, you know what, I don't know everything, and nor should I know everything about everything, but I've hired people who are experts at this. So I think that holds much larger implications. And I also just want to add, you guys can jump in at any time. Like, hopefully this is more like a conversation and less like a talk at you. So I just want to make that explicit.
Yeah, and that's what I realized, that a lot of our ELL or ESL teachers had been asked to use this resource, but not given any guidance, and also not allowed to make other decisions. And so that's why they were asking those questions. But after we have these conversations, they said, well, yeah, I know I can embed this strategy. And then it's more of the conversation that, okay, let's do that. You know, why do you feel you cannot? Yeah, and so that was really important conversation. Any other questions or thoughts on that whole wobble stance and how that came to be? So I think my stance was really, and it's always been an advocate for language learners. And at this point, it shifted that it was still for the language learners, but it was now for the teachers as well, to say, you are a professional, you are able to make these decisions, and let's do that together with the mainstream teachers, right? And so we also look at this, I want you to look at, since C3WP is a new resource, it is a program, okay? So a lot of people, they hear program, they think scripted curriculum, and right away they're like, we don't want any of that. But we want you to think about where this program came from, and then the research and the writing and all that's come from it. It's really created on some really strong writing project principles. And so I want you to think of it as, when we see ELL students, we're asked to consider them from an asset mentality, not a deficit mentality, right? So what do they have? What can they bring? And so to look at it from that perspective. Now I want you to think of this curriculum, okay, and this resource, C3WP, also from that lens of, okay, this works. It's worked. It's been proven. There's been a lot of research done. A lot of teachers are using it. I've seen it myself. It's empowered students to write. It's given them agency to do some amazing things. And it's also empowered teachers to really strengthen their writing instruction. So if you can think of it and look at it through that lens of, okay, what opportunities are here for me? I think that will be more helpful as you look and learn about C3WP. So going back now to the resource, the writing and revising claims, all of the, let's see here, there are lessons embedded. So this is just one example, and all of the instructions are there, all of the resources, there are links to all of the material provided for you. And then again, I want to point out the ELL notice. So you'll notice two different types of boxes for ELLs. There'll be notices and opportunities. So this one in particular says that there's layered writing And you'll see this throughout many of the resources. They layer the writing. So we might look at a text and ask students to write, and then, and it's informal writing, and then we'll look at another text, and then we'll layer some more writing, and it continues this flow. And you'll see that as one of as a strategy throughout a lot of the resources, a lot of the units. So this one says, layered writing allows ELL's time to process, translate, and respond in their native or dominant language and gain vocabulary and comprehension. So one, we just know that that's good practice to then read a text, write about it, come back, continue, and then look back. But especially for ELL students, we know this, right? That, excuse me, that it's harder for them to just speak a response because they are processing. There's so much, depending on where their language proficiency may be, they might just need a couple more seconds to really find that right word. I mentioned English is my second language, and I still do that. I prefer to write down what I'm going to say. I told Rachel, I'm like, okay, I have my script on the side of the screen, and she just always giggles. She says, you write it out, but you never, like, you're fine just talking. But it's this thing that I know that I need to process things just a little bit different and in a little more time. And that's okay. And we need to tell and name that for our students. That's pretty powerful. So that's an ELL notice. If you keep scrolling down, is it the same page? So the third page on the bottom left, it says ELL scaffolding opportunity. So this one's different. So this is an opportunity, especially if you need help with, a student needs help with language acquisition or reading or writing. It says the instructions for this resource, like this in particular, says although sentence stems are introduced later in this unit during discussion time, consider introducing them before reading as an aid to provide written responses. The written responses will allow time to process language and also build confidence for discussion time. So you'll see these opportunities or these call-out boxes throughout the resources, and we didn't do them for every single opportunity. We just did it enough so that people can begin to see, like, okay, this is good practice for our students. I'll pause right now to ask for any thoughts, any clarification, any questions.
Who do you find's using this?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
Who do you know that is using this?
The resources?
Uh-huh.
Let's see here. There's about 2/3 of the writing project sites across the nation that have applied for grants to use to create programs in their state and then facilitate this particular material within school districts, especially in high need schools. So the numbers are, I don't know, Molly, do you have any idea? English teachers, I know there's a lot in Colorado that are using C3WP.
Yeah, so in Colorado, we had a project. It was two 1-year opportunities. The first opportunity, we worked with 20 teachers from across the Front Range to implement this, and then they took it into their schools. And then the schools adopted it to greater and lesser degrees. And then we worked with, I want to say it was Aurora West Middle and High School last year. And we did 50 hours of PD with their entire school to implement the C3WP work across disciplines. So I think one of the cool things about this site is that it does work across discipline. Like Jen, I introduced it to Jen, last year or 2 years ago?
Beginning last year.
Yeah, and so she actually uses quite a bit of stuff, and she sort of changes it up to make it work for her readings and for what she's doing in her social studies classroom. So there's, God, I'd say like 50 teachers at least that I know of in Colorado who are using the C3WP stuff. So
that's an interesting number to actually ask Tom and find out. I wonder if they could have a number. I know in Idaho, so we used it at our site with our TCs. There were 16 of them, and they were at each of their classrooms. And that was 1 year. And then the second year, we specifically taught it in Caldwell at Jefferson Middle School, since Lisa, you're familiar with Caldwell. And we, all of their English department used it. And then, it's a 1 year grant, but I have gotten emails this year questioning about, oh, hey, I'm still using this material now. What can we do? Et cetera. So that's exciting. And I'm a thinking partner with places from, the Penn State Writing Project, the Pennsylvania Writing and Literacy Writing Project, Genesee Writing Project from New York, Virginia Writing Project, where else? Minnesota Writing Project. So each of those, and that's just 5 that I've listed, they've at least worked with over 30 teachers. And they have full districts that have taken it on. So good question, but I'm not able to answer it. So there are a lot. Yeah. And let's see. Well, I'll ask, is there any more questions?
I don't have a question, but I have a comment about the site that, like, one of the things that I really love about the stance that the writing project's taken with the C3WP work is that while it's a program, you can sort of pick and choose from the text sets, you can pick and choose from the skills that you're sort of implementing for students. And so I think like the stance that the writing project takes is that your students are your students, and your students and what it is they need. So like you can take it whole hog for exactly what it is and sort of implement it like the day by day thing, or you can sort of pick and choose parts that are most relevant for your situation. And I think that's the thing for me that really speaks to me as an English teacher, sort of putting this out in interdisciplinary spaces, that we can give it to our colleagues in different spaces and allow them to make professional decisions because they're the experts in their content, to allow them then to sort of elevate what it is that they're already doing using some of these sources that are tried and true and research tested and all the things that we know are great about what the writing project does. So.
Yeah, one of our TCs, my friend Rhonda Urquidi, she said it best. She said, it's like a recipe. And I introduce this when I facilitate any workshops. That's how I introduce it, because it just makes sense. We've all, tasted some food before, and we want the recipe because we already know what that tasted like. So this research, there's been a lot of research, and Molly has the documents on that she wants to share. So that research is really good. So we want the recipe. So here's the recipe. The recipe's there. But like anybody that's ever cooked anything, or if you are really good at cooking, you follow the recipe the first time, right? And then afterwards you say, oh, well, what if I add a little bit of this or a little bit of that? And then you can make it your own depending on what you like and what you know about cooking. I always stay with the recipe because I just like that recipe. So that's how I introduce it. So I would also recommend it that way. it's a good recipe, just try it the first time, and then afterwards, yeah, make it your own. What will your students like? And as we know, one year your students you get a group of students, and next year the students need something else. So you might need to add a little more salt. I don't know.
Cecilia, will you show us on the site like some of your favorite parts and sort of walk us through like how the site works and like your sort of highlights that you especially sort of are attuned to?
Yeah, I will. I think the most helpful will be to go back to the secondary instructional resource guide. Can you guys all get back to that graphic? Are we all there? Okay, so this is where you will always kind of want to start, okay? And I think sometimes we have the tendency to say like, oh, well, I want to, teach my kids about making moves with evidence, but and that's completely fine. I want to point out that the third column though has skill emphasis, okay? So it's more about where are your students. You know where your students are at. What skills do they need to know? Are they at the level where they need to develop routine argument strategies and skills? If so, then they need to be at that top one, creating culture and argument, writing civic discourse, okay? If not, if their skill level are, you can keep scrolling down, you can say, well, no, they need to analyze elements of a purposeful op-ed, and they need to be able to connect and relate countering evidence sets or things like that. Well, then that's what that whole resource will walk them through. And just like the one that we looked at the call-out boxes for, it gives you all the instructions. It gives you times, how long, an estimated time, of course, videos, options, handouts, note catchers, PowerPoints. Everything is is there for you to be able to teach those skills. Now, if you're working with English language learners or language learners, it's almost like for you would have a fourth column, okay? So you would know, okay, what are the skills that they need in writing, but also for your students, you would want to think, what are the language skills that they need as well? And to keep those in mind as you're looking at that unit. So if they need some language acquisition, then you're also going to look at that unit or that resource, and as you're walking through, you're going to be thinking, okay, where do we need to have them stop and embed strategies that get them to practice orally speaking, okay? And then let's pick one or two strategies and let's embed them or alternate them from one unit to another, so they can get familiar with the strategy and focus on orally speaking. So let's see here. One of my favorite units, I'll just point this one out, is if you click on organizing evidence. Can we click on that one? Or before we move on, do you have any questions about what I just walked you through or said? Let's go to organizing evidence. So as you notice, this one's pretty down, it's lower on that organizer, and that means it is a lot more complex writing skills. So that graph is made in the sense that the complexity of the skills are lower. So it's kind of layered from the top to the bottom. So this is a really neat resource, and it's about organizing evidence, and it focuses on moving students away from a pro-con stance, an argument. And it's more about, let's look at what the evidence says. And the evidence introduced shows so many different perspectives and different stakeholders in the particular topic. And then you ask students to to organize first the evidence, organize it, see if they can group it and what they're noticing in these patterns. And then based on that, what claim can you make? And they can make different claims depending on the evidence that they've organized. They will get to the point where they'll say, well, based on this evidence, here's a claim that these people would make because they have an economic stance, right? And then they'll look at this other evidence that they've organized. They're like, well, there's this moral dilemma right here. Like, okay, well, from that moral stance, what claim can you make? And so it moves them away from, I'm either for this or I'm against this, to, from this perspective, here's, a claim. And then it also moves them to finding a solution. And that's a really cool resource and unit, and it's on Space Trash. And so the times that I've taught this, even with teachers, so I use it a lot in PD. The response from teachers from content areas, they're very excited, one, because of the content. And then I remember one teacher, she says, I am so mad. And I thought, oh no, you don't want to hear that as you're facilitating PD. And she said, I am so mad at myself. I've been teaching for 20 years. I've been teaching English for 20 years, and I've never moved my students towards not just a pro-con. I've never moved them toward this. Like, how have I not been given this instruction? How did I not know that? I think she was she's a wonderful teacher. So I think she was being very hard on herself, but she had that aha of, I can do this earlier on. We can have that conversation. And I think for our climate, it's a very important way to really start having conversations and naming the moves that are made in just dialogue, not only in writing, for just any conversation right now. So that's a really cool unit and fun unit. But again, lots of more advanced skills. Questions?
Are there other resources that are listed? Because I'm looking at some of the lists here as kind of some of the mentor texts. Are there some other resources that we could go and steal other texts to borrow from that would be relevant for our courses, or is it just kind of plug and chug and see what we can find?
So that is a question we get often on, this is a great unit, but I'm focusing on this different content area. So the text sets have actually been selected very purposefully for the particular skills and with each resource. So if you think of it as trying this recipe so that the students can learn particular skills regardless of the content first, that's what we try to communicate, that it's not so much about the content at this point, it's about the skills. And so some teachers have told our students, okay, we're going to go through this resource so that you can learn these skills, okay? And then the teacher can repeat it because then they have the skills. So now we're going to practice those skills, but then we're going to do a different content. And that's when you can pick whatever different content that you are teaching. However, there is also a whole resource on how to create a text set. So if you do want to create your own text set, and that's something actually I think Molly could walk you guys through and say, okay, I want to use this. So maybe your students are ready for organizing evidence, but you don't want to use the space trash topic, and you really want to put together a text set. So I really like the search button on our website, because then you can type in text set. Let's do that. And then the first thing that pops up is creating a text set. Do you guys see that? If you all follow those instructions. And it walks you through how to create your own text set. So that might be something really powerful for you to do as your team, your cooperating teacher team, or even as a whole, and see what text sets that you can all create.
Hi, Cecilia. I'm Kevin. I'm an English language support specialist, and thank you for presenting all of this. It's very robust. So one of the observations I've made is that I see, and tell me if I've got this wrong, there's like a promotion of routine. There's some qualities in the lessons that we've been browsing through, and that's like instructional routine, and focusing on particular skills for a lesson, students having individual choice about their content, what they're thinking about while they're practicing that skill, and then obviously student product, like a priority of students producing their writing based on using the skill that they've just learned. Do I have that correct?
Yes, absolutely.
So that's great. And in my experience from middle school and then in high school, I was practicing Lucy Calkins' workshop model and adapting that to secondary. And I know that that's becoming important to a lot of secondary schools as a method, but it's difficult as Lucy Calkins' workshop method model. It's not easily adaptable to secondary. So, but this seems like an approach that does seem very friendly to secondary teachers. So am I onto something? Is there something in the same vein as the workshop model as what we're seeing here?
I'm not as familiar with Lucy Calkins' work, so I apologize for that. But I think that, and this started with secondary instruction, and that was definitely what we had in mind, because we felt that there are all these resources, there's all these workshop models, writing workshops, different things like that at the elementary level, and then something happens middle school, secondary. And so that was our target, but it was received very well. And so our elementary teachers then asked, well, why can't we have this as well? So if you notice in the instructional resource tab, there's secondary, but there's also upper elementary, and there is lower elementary in the works. So especially for our ELL students, their language proficiency might not be at the high school level, and so a lot of our teachers use the upper elementary, a lot of the text sets for upper elementary, in order to then, that's where they start, and eventually they move to the secondary. So I'm not sure that I answered your question.
No, I think, yeah, that, I guess what I would suggest is, like, as I'm reading this, I'm seeing, oh, this is cool. This is a lot of what I would like to keep doing as a specialist with co-teachers. Mm-hmm. I would love to implement a lot of these things. Like I said, ritualizing the routine of instruction that helps ELLs, focusing on a particular skill at various depths for what students can produce, individual choice, so you have an asset-based approach to what students bring to the classroom, and emphasizing student product, that every student will produce for most of the period, right? Those are things that are gold for English language learners. But, and I learned that through my, professional biography. I learned that through adapting the workshop model from elementary school up to secondary. But I've noticed that as we, in our group, we've talked about workshop model. In fact, we observed one that it's been, for some secondary teachers, there's been this a sort of a leap that needs to be made. Like, how do I do that? It's, it doesn't seem like I can, but this resource might just be a way that some teachers can find traction to say, oh, this is how I can do it. So
Kevin, I'm gonna hop in, because I did full on 100% workshop model when I taught middle school, and then moving to high school, it's been sort of a, I'll do it and then I'll do something more directed and then I'll do it. And I think what this offers is a way to do a workshop model and then offer students sort of these things to think about, right? So as you're compiling evidence and figuring out what evidence you're going to use, how are you going to decide what's most important? Oh, well, here's a tool that you can use as you're sort of figuring that out. So I think it does work nicely in a workshop model, and it allows you to scaffold in ways that allow students to sort of take stances from their own sort of purpose and perspective. And then, like, if I need to have, like, if a kid has no idea what they want to study or, you know, sort of approach, it offers that as well. So I agree with you. I think it offers an on-ramp for teachers to implement a workshop. I think it offers sort of a safe place to start grappling with some of the things that happen within a workshop and to allow teachers to give up some of the control that they feel they need to have over students as they're writing and processing and that kind of thing. So it offers, I mean, I would venture to say it offers some scaffolding for teachers as well. So.
Actually, that is in the research, and the research is also on the website. So you can look under like the research and the findings, and that was one of the biggest findings that they were realizing that, and which is why a lot of the thinking partnership was created and the PD is necessary along with just this website, is because they realized that the students' writing was not to the grade level, or was a little weaker, but they were finding that the teachers did not have professional development or help with instruction in writing. They didn't have that background. They didn't have that support. So once we supported teachers, then they were able then to better support their students in their writing. So you're right in that when we introduce these resources with non-English teachers, they realize, oh, I guess I do teach writing. You know, we do write in our classroom, but they've also never identified as a writing teacher or had any of that specific instruction. So this is a resource. This is a tool that they can use. And you're right, they're a lot more open to it. And then what we find is that once they try the recipe, then they say, what other writing instruction can we have? Which is really cool to hear from a welding teacher and from a health teacher. I had that experience last year from a very rural area, and there was a teacher that taught weightlifting, and to see the text sets that he was using and the writing he was having his kids do in a weightlifting class, he's just like, I came to this thinking, I'm just going to get a credit. But he had produced all this material, and he saw himself as, I guess I do teach writing, you know? So that was really cool. Thanks for pointing that out.
What other questions do you guys have, or things that are resonating for you as we sort of talk through this site and the issues presented with it? Nada?
Well, they might not have context for it. Yeah, it's so new. Like,
I was kind of thinking. I was kind of thinking about asking you in front of everybody, Molly, if we can just have more time to peruse all of this too, you know, in our future times together. I'm taking so much in while I'm looking at it.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things I'm thinking for our group, you know, we need time to plan our demos and to think about how to layer, you know, all these texts and things that we've been thinking about. So I feel like the next couple of times we meet, just having big chunks of time to sit and talk through all of the things that we're looking at and learning about and that kind of thing. So.
Yeah. And if there's something that you might want to try, I would suggest the top two on the secondary graph, creating a culture of argument, writing civic discourse, or writing into the day to jumpstart argument. Those can easily be embedded into whatever you're doing right now. And it moves away also from this idea that argument is just one unit that we teach this one time at some point in the school year. It's like, no, argument writing it's constant, and sometimes it can be embedded with informational writing and other type of writing, because as we know in the real world, writing is not just one thing, right? It's a little bit of everything, right? And then that's what's good writing. That's what makes you really want to read something, is that even an argument has a lot of, it has story in it and narrative and dialogue, right? So, I would suggest to try those two and then come back and just talk together. But what we find, the website, people say there's so much, it's overwhelming, and like anything else, we just got to try it. And the more you try it, the more you become familiar with it. Molly's there for you. Once you meet me, I'm a thinking partner for life. So I'm happy to, send an email back or chat on the phone or what have you.
Well, and I want to give a little shout out to Kim and Bonnie, because they just started implementing this writing into the day into their classroom, and it's really, like, to hear them talk about it, it's really reinvigorating some things for them. And I think that part of the site, that page of the site, you guys, about writing into the day, I think it's going to give you some really great ideas as you're thinking about layering in argument and making it relevant for your students. We've been talking a lot about choice and relevancy and responsiveness to our students, especially as it relates to argumentation. And so I think that's going to be a really great tool for the two of you as you sort of think about the writing into the day and layering in the argument pieces to it. There's some really cool exercises on there that I've done with my students that they really, really respond to. So just a little shout out.
We actually already looked at it, and what we liked about it was, so far our prompts have been very isolated per day, and I liked the progression that even though you're starting with writing into the day, they're not isolated, that you're building towards a larger argument. So I think we'll look into that a little more.
Yes, we've been skimming through all these materials. We've seen several things that we think will work really well with our argument unit and writing. So it looks like there's just a lot of material there. I have one question. That was sometime at the beginning when we were talking about who's using this, and it was mentioned that there were various grants. Now, is this tool, this C3WP, is this something that schools pay for? Is it something that's available to everybody? Or the grants maybe for training, or what was that reference to?
So originally, in order to get this work out, based on, we received the National Writing Project received a very large grant in order to disseminate this work. And then different writing project sites could apply for these grants. So the National Writing Project divided the money out and allotted specific number of grants. I don't remember the numbers the first years, but then different sites applied, and then they received it, and then they provided professional development for their teacher consultants. And then the second year, they were allowed to apply for another grant to then facilitate all those teachers that had used it in their classroom to then go and facilitate in high need schools and other local schools in their area, and have, non-writing project teachers try and implement this material into their classrooms. And so it was a way to just build capacity of this work, and it's been really successful. Unfortunately, the funding has stopped, so the grants are no longer available. But now that we have had such great response to the resources, districts are paying for it. So they are contacting writing project sites, and there's PD money, and so they said, this is the type of PD that we want. We want argument writing, and so that's what's happening now. I wanted to point out one more thing. If you scroll down in the same resource guide to making civic arguments, I just want to tell a story about that particular unit. One of our TCs from I think it's Northern California, Carla Troutman, she uses Making Civic Arguments unit with her, a resource with her students. And there was one particular gal that noticed, they live in a very rural area and it's just very spread out. So a large space, not a lot of people, and this gal had these medical needs, and she would often have to travel to the Bay Area to receive her medical needs, right? And she just talked about how, not everybody has the funds to do that. And so from that piece of writing and from the work from this resource, Making Civic Argument, this gal was able to get her community a mobile medical van. So that's part of their community now. And so there's this van that can go to people that have medical needs. So when we talk about how the students are seeing how writing gives them agency and allows them to make some sort of change in this world, that was the really powerful story. So we won't always get those huge success stories, right? But they're there. And even if we can plant that seed of, writing is powerful, kids. What can we do with it? That's empowering.
I feel like that's a theme for our weekend. So,
good theme.
What's that?
It's a good theme.
It is. It's a great thing. Yeah, we're rocking it here in Colorado.
Woohoo!
To get you here, Cecilia.
Hey.
Yeah. Does anyone?
I'll just pack. I'm ready to pack.
Yeah, there we go. Does anyone have any other questions before we wrap up and let Cecilia enjoy her coffee in peace?
And just thank you.
Yeah. Let me know how you guys like exploring the materials. Any questions? There's lots of people that are available, but good luck with everything and enjoy your Saturday too.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much. So cool.
For all of this. And we're going to meet in the room to just sort